Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Walensky, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. All right, well, we are ready to get going with another podcast episode with accessibility professionals. And today I'm pleased to be talking with Lucy Greco. Hello, Lucy. How are you today?
Good, thanks. How about you?
Well, it's a pouring down rain in the Seattle area where I'm at with my home office. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm talking to you from sunny, beautiful, sunny California. We're sitting here at 21 degrees Celsius today.
All right. Well, you definitely have a little bit of better weather than I do right now, but it's great to have you to chat with you about your experiences with accessibility. But why don't we just start with you talking about what you're involved with right now, your position and the type of work that you do.
Sounds great. So I am the accessibility evangelist for UC Berkeley. What that means, it's actually electronic accessibility evangelist. What that means is I help people on campus try and find ways to make any of our digital assets as accessible as possible. Everything from websites, applications, we look at the photocopiers, we'll look at all kinds of devices that people might need to interact with, and I help make recommendations to make those things more accessible for people with disabilities.
Well, I definitely want to check in and get more details about some of the things that you're working on at the university. But one of the main objectives of this series is to find out how people ended up in the professional area of accessibility where they are today. So maybe you could, take me back and let me know about your own experiences, step through things to where you are today.
So it's a really natural fit for me in accessibility. I am a extreme technology nerd. I love technology. I love tech in general. I'm an early adopter of of new toys and new tools. And I'm totally blind myself. So that early adopterness, ends up paying off maybe only 5% of the time. So the rest of the time I'm having to work to try and find accommodations, workarounds, and accessibility fixes. But technology has really been a huge asset to me in general. So when I was in junior high, I didn't have any technology, and I was having to do my papers by writing them up in Braille, then sitting down at a typewriter with a sighted person behind me to see how it was going. And that sighted person would tell me if I made a mistake and read off what I was typing just to make sure I was typing the right thing. And we had a rule that if I made 3 mistakes that were fixed with liquid paper, we'd have to tear it up and start the sheet over again. Mm-hmm. So needless to say, my papers were terribly short when I was in junior high, and it took a lot longer to write them than everyone else. So everybody else might get 3 papers between September and December. I got maybe 1 done, and it was always, the most dreadful thing. I hated having to write something up for someone more than anything else. And then they gave me a computer, and it was an old Apple IIe. And at that time, it was even old. And oh my God, it just liberated me completely. I went from, taking 3 to 4 months to write something because I had to wait for the person to show up to help me proofread it, to being able to do it in the same amount of time as everybody else. So, where it would take me 2-3 months to do a 5-10 page paper, I could now do a 5-10 page paper in a month like everyone else. So it was really exciting. I became addicted to that whole idea of having a computer. It was something that helped me do things independently and let me get around on my own through things that I always had to depend on someone else for. So, I was the first person I knew who had a cell phone. I was the first person I knew who started buying robots to do different types of activities in my house. I am a complete technology hoarder and a technology nerd.
Well, it's interesting to hear your story about that, and this certainly technology is made a lot of advances in accessibility possible over the past 20 years or so. But as you were getting involved in it, you mentioned that you were a nerd, as you said, and so you had an affinity for that type of thing. I imagine that that maybe put you a little bit ahead early on, before tools were widely accessible, where you were able to figure things out, and maybe that just wasn't as possible for others that didn't have the same technical know-how.
Exactly. So, when I was in college, I would help all the other disabled students figure out how to use a computer so they could get the same advantages. And then, I naturally fell into doing consulting work where I was hired to train people on computers for several years. And then naturally, I got hired by the university to help disabled students learn how to use computers. I did skills assessments for them and helped them find the right technology for them as people with disabilities. And a lot of my work was helping them figure out how to use the tools that weren't accessible on campus. So a natural progression was changing to being the person who systemically changed those tools so students didn't have to have accommodations and remediations.
Mhm.
So going from, each student having to be taught how to accommodate themselves to having a tool that was accessible from the start was a huge change. And, that's where I've been for the past, 9 years now.
Well, let's go back to where you mentioned, in college you were the person helping others to be able to use their computers and things like that. Was that where you first started to think about accessibility as being a career beyond just you using those tools for your own purposes?
I think it was more, I was doing it from friend to friend. So I wasn't thinking of it as a career. But when I got offered my first contract, which was maybe a year or two before I graduated, to actually teach someone, that's when I realized, hey, somebody's going to pay me to teach somebody how to use a computer. And it was a really fun contract. And I had a lot of, I really enjoyed doing it. It was a woman who had an acquired brain injury, and I was teaching her how to use Microsoft Word. It was a natural fit.
Hmm. And so then you mentioned you were doing some consulting work. So what was the nature of that? Were you doing projects to help organizations upgrade their software, or what was involved with that?
I was mostly working on new product reviews for accessibility. So I would be called in by, a company who was trying to create a new call center software for, that they would be selling. So I had to review the call center software and make sure it worked with a screen reader, or
Mhm.
I would review web pages to make sure that they were accessible. Just different things like that kind of consulting. But mostly the kind of work I was doing before I started at the university was teaching, working with a person with one disability or another and getting them up and running with the computer and teaching them the skills they needed to be independent.
Well, yeah, you mentioned some of the things that you do at the university now, and you mentioned that most of the focus is on the electronic side of things. That's still a big area to be able to support at universities. So, what are some of the areas that you have to be responsible for at the university?
Everything from HR applications to student learning systems to library databases and resources. One of my favorite projects that I've worked on in the past couple of years was getting scanners in the library to replace the photocopiers and making sure that those scanners could be used by people with disabilities. Everything from making sure that a person with a wheelchair could actually reach the controls on the device, and that a blind person had a screen reader on the device automatically so that they could use it to scan documents so that they could read them.
Well, I've taught at the University of Washington on a part-time and full-time basis at times for a long time, and so I'm familiar with how they do support accessibility there. And I know that there are a lot of issues with funding for adequate equipment, and also just the procurement process for a bureaucracy can be kind of stifling. How have you been able to find your way through those minefields?
It's brutal. I mean, let's not hold back any punches here. It's absolutely brutal to be in an academic situation for a public university that has no funding. It's an uphill battle convincing people that the work needs to be done and the time needs to be spent, and most of all, the money needs to be spent. So, I am the only person doing what I do in the entire University of California system. There's a couple of other people who don't have anywhere near the same skill set that are doing it slightly, at different campuses, but they're not doing it full time, and none of them have a disability. And frankly, it needs to have somebody with a disability to understand how people with disabilities work with things and understand the pain and help people find the right sweet point for using technology.
Well, it definitely sounds like there's a lot of obstacles in the way there. Are there some places where you feel you've been able to make some progress, or some wins, or things that you're encouraged about moving forward?
I love seeing people become excited about accessibility and kind of blossoming. I mean, my title is evangelist because, number one, the priority thing for me to do is to have other people become passionate about accessibility and think about it in their work. So taking somebody who's working on a website and bringing them to the point where, they're the ones initiating the accessibility and thinking about it. I've been working with somebody who works on our phone system, and, the guy keeps coming to me over and over again going, does this look accessible to you? Does this look accessible to you? And he's working on all kinds of different things that I would never have even dreamed of, like making sure that the call center phones, a person can actually read the caller ID on it, and things like that. And it's beautiful. I mean, that to me, getting somebody inspired to be accessible is the really promising thing. The funding, the budget, all that stuff definitely gets me down.
Are there any things you're working on right now or coming up in the future that you're particularly excited about or looking forward to working on?
I am doing some data mining right now of our automated testing tool software. So I am working on looking at ways to discover what the things people are doing wrong the most are, and then coming up with trainings on how to fix that. So we're actually going through and looking at our automated accessibility testing tool, and we're creating an application that kind of goes through the 4,000 websites that are enrolled in that tool, and to see what is it that everyone's doing wrong, so that I can start creating a training regimen for people that covers those things that everyone's getting wrong. And I know that's kind of boring, but it really is exciting to know that, I'm going to have a huge impact just by using a little bit of data.
Yeah, no, it's really great hearing about that. But one of the questions I pose, or kind of a comment that I've done in other episodes of this series, is just mention that I've been working with accessibility for about 22, 23 years now. And, when I look back on, when I first started doing that, if I was back at that time 20 some years ago, I would have thought we would have come farther than we have at this point. On the other hand, there's been an amazing amount of things that have changed over the past years. From your perspective, what does it feel like? Does it feel like we've moved along at a reasonable pace, or are we ahead or behind, or where do you feel about that?
I think we still have a lot of education to do. I think we're getting closer to actually being at a point where we can say we've made some progress. But the problem is, people will create things because we are a very artistic, creative, we think, we build, we invent. But if we don't teach those people who have those tendencies to be the builders and the inventors and the creators about disability, and it's not about accessibility we have to teach them, it's about disability we have to teach them, we are going to continue to stay behind behind that 8 ball. I mean, I can look at my cell phone and find at least one unlabeled button in every single app I'm using. It's we're still got a long way to go. Yes, we're able to do a lot more today than we were 22 years ago and 35 years ago when I started working in this industry, most definitely. But in other ways, we're still really blocking people with disabilities. I mean, let's look at the whole pandemic that we've had to just come through. There are still very few databases of COVID information and visualizations that are inaccessible to people. I don't know from day to day what the numbers are in the United States because all the pages that give me that information have completely neglected to do that accessibly. There are ways to do it accessibly, but the people who are creating them didn't think about disability and they just wanted to, get this information up as quickly as possible. And now the information is out there and it's too late. I mean, we can't go back and fix it. We could, but there's no initiative or willpower to do that.
One of the things, that I find it's kind of difficult for me as I try to evangelize it with some of the clients, that are interested in designing new projects aren't always ready to invest in accessibility, and when it happens, often it's at it's about compliance issues, and I think it's not well understood that there potentially is a huge return on investment by making our products available to everyone so that they can participate in that market.
Exactly. I'm recording a review of a product today that actually did a really good job of accessibility, except the one thing that they missed was the store. So in the store where you can actually buy different components for the tool and upgrade your device, they neglected to put the names of the items in there. It's just a list of numbers, and I can't figure out, what costs $19 versus what costs $250. And then, that's a huge opportunity that they've missed. I mean, world statistics say 21 million people. Other statistics say 50 million people. There is a bold fact that we use in the industry that 1 in 5 people will have a temporary or permanent disability in the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. That's huge. I mean, that's a massive number of people that if you don't make things accessible, they can't use your product and you won't get their money. I mean, let's look at the baby boomers that are aging. The more they age, the less they're able to contribute to the economy because we're blocking them from contributing by not making things accessible.
Well, Lucy, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and your frank assessments of where things are, and hopefully we can move forward. But I appreciate you taking the time to be with me on this conversation today.
Not a problem. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.